Hey everybody, it's Adam Lee from Clarice Wine Company and Beaumarchais Winery, and I am thrilled to be here with Ed Kurtzman from Mansfield Dunn and Matt Rivlett from Siduri, and we're going to be talking about the San Lucia Highlands today, one of our favorite areas for Pinot Noir. Ed, I guess first off, tell us a little bit about Mansfield Dunn and then your experience in San Lucia Highlands. How long have you been there?
Sure. Excuse me. Thanks, Adam. Great to be here. And Mansfield Dunn started in 2010. Back then, it was just a label that John Peterson started. Mansfield is his middle name and Dunn is his mother's maiden name. So John Peterson started this label. He had just purchased a 9-acre parcel kind of between Rosella's and Gary's in the Santa Lucia Highlands. And our 2010 vintage that we made was only 2 barrels. So we started slowly and have grown from there. And have also, Mansfield Dunn acquired hundreds of acres of property way up in the Santa Lucia Highlands, way up high. And the vineyard is called Cortada Alta. Mm-hmm. The vineyard started being planted in 2014, and we had our first vintage, very small crop, in 2016. And we have grown from there too. And then go ahead, Adam.
Well, no, you've been, though, I mean, Mansfield Dunn is relatively new then. I mean, not tremendously so, but you've been in the area for a longer period of time than that.
Yeah, much longer. I love my first experience in the SLH. I was the new winemaker at Testarossa in 1999, and George Torquato was the old winemaker, and he was handing the reins over to me, but also taking me to meet the growers. And I had met Gary Francione once at a wedding in 1995, but hadn't seen him since then. And I had never met Gary Pizzoni before. I met Jeff Pizzoni once in 1997. I was hiring interns at Chalone, where I was the assistant winemaker across Monterey County. And this 18-year-old kid walked in. I had just hired the last intern. This 18-year-old kid walked in looking for a job, told us about his father's new vineyard in the Santa Lucia Highlands, which I had never heard of before. And that was Jeff Pizzoni. So he had just missed out on, or I missed out on hiring him as an intern. But the day that George Torquato took me to the SLH in 1999, we first went to Rosella's, met Gary Francione. And then we met Gary Pizzoni and Gary Francione over at Gary's. And Gary Pizzoni was so out of sorts because he was staring at his bilateral cordons, the way that they were training the vines. And he saw this big gap on each vine in between where the 2 cordons separated, and there was no fruit. This is June of 1999. So we knew how much fruit was out there. And am I allowed to use expletives on Facebook?
You are.
Okay.
I've seen it before.
So George Torquato, the former winemaker, was saying, "Hey guys, everything looks great." And Gary Pizzoni said, "Yeah, but look at the middle. There's no fruit. We hate the fucking middle." So the next year they went to unilateral cordon and got rid of that middle.
So you at Chalone, and then starting there in 99, tell people who maybe not as familiar with it, but obviously you know it very well, where the San Lucia Highlands is exactly, because it's not a big tourist area at all.
It's not a big tourist area at all. It's lacking great hotels and great restaurants. There are a couple here and there, but not many. Hopefully that'll change in years to come. But it is Monterey County. I think it's 11 miles long by maybe 3 miles wide at the widest. And if you went directly from the middle of the Santa Lucia Highlands, it's longer north to south than it is east to west. It goes along the west side of Highway 101. And if you took a slice out of the middle of the Santa Lucia Highlands and went due west, I think you would end up in Big Sur. But to drive from the city of Monterey on Monterey Bay to the northern end of the Santa Lucia Highlands, just south of Salinas, I think it's about a 35, 40-minute drive. So it's inland.
I always laugh that if you're driving down and you go through Salinas and you get to the little town of Chualar and you look over to the west, from 101, you'll see the vineyards running, and it is that stretch just in the hills. The valley floor is great for growing vegetables of all sorts. you get too far up in the hills and you really can't grow much in the way of grapes. But there is that stretch of land that runs along from Chualar down to Soledad. And I remember for a long time there was a billboard that said, "It's happening in Soledad." And I never figured out what it was, because there's not an awful lot that is happening in Soledad other than a prison break every now and then. But there are some of the best Mexican food restaurants you'll ever see in your life there. And I think more importantly, some amazing, amazing grapes. Matt, you are a bit newer to the SLH than Ed. I think you had some experience at Costa Brown, I would guess, and then now at Siduri.
Yes, so that's correct. So when I was at Costa Brown in 2010, we were sourcing from Gary's and Rosella's, and my job was to basically run the crush pad, use the forklift to dump bins of grapes. We had 6 sorters on the table, and it was usually fairly busy. We'd sort out leaves and rotten grapes, raisins, stuff like that. But the day that we got our first pick of Rosella's, I'll never forget it, because we dumped these boxes of grapes into the hopper, and then you see them on the table and there's nothing to sort out. The fruit was absolutely pristine. The flavors were amazing. And it was, one of those things where they were making me look bad because the sorting crew didn't have anything to do. They were just sitting around telling stories and kind of throwing clusters at each other and stuff like that. But I'll never forget, having that kind of experience with the fruit and tasting the wines from the previous vintage that were in barrel, and saying, wow, this place is really spectacular. I can't wait to get my boots on the ground and see more of it. So fast forward a few years later, and I'm happy to be back.
Yeah, so you're back there with Siduri, and Siduri gets fruit from a lot of vineyards in the SLH, kind of from the north to the south, really, in the region. Tell people about the differences there and the influence of the Bay, because it really does open up to Monterey Bay, and that's really determines a lot of what goes on in the Santa Lucia Highlands.
Yeah, it's so much of the grape growing season is driven by wind. It provides that freshness. It provides the acid retention in the fruit. And there's a really cool geological feature of Monterey Bay called the Blue Grand Canyon. So about 100 yards off of Moss Landing on the Monterey Bay is a huge canyon, and where the water is really, really deep, it's also really, really cold. So as the southern end of that Salinas Valley starts to warm up, the winds that are drawn off of the bay are pretty chilly, and they are pretty powerful. So it's not uncommon to have, daytime temperatures where it starts cooling off at 1, 2, 3 in the afternoon, which is quite a rarity for a lot of coastal growing areas. So in general, as you work your way south to the north, the south, you'll get a little bit more richness, a little bit of a darker fruit profile. The soil is a little bit sandier. And as you work your way north, we start at Sierra Mar in the south for Siduri, work our way a little bit towards the midsection where we have Gary's and Sobranis. And then finally, Rosella's is kind of at the northern terminus for us at Siduri, where we get really effusive, kind of bright red and blue fruits. So it's a really awesome contrast. And what's a really small area, Ed, you mentioned earlier, it's an 11-mile stretch. It's tiny.
So that wind, I think, is really vitally important. I mean, it obviously just being open to the ocean cools it down. But when the interior valley, the central valley warms up, it is, as you said, it works kind of as a vacuum cleaner and sucks in the winds. And I've had my car door blown shut a couple of times. I mean, back in the old days when you didn't have automatic key starters or whatever, my keys would have been locked in locked in the car. I don't know of an area, quite frankly, that I have ever gotten grapes from that really is cooler at 3 o'clock in the afternoon than it is at 1:30 in the afternoon. I just don't see that any other place. And I think the hang time is extraordinary that wind and that cooling air provides. Ed, with your experience, I mean, you were mentioning the elevation on one of the vineyards that you get fruit from now. How does that affect things in San Lucia?
It really does affect things in a couple ways. So the elevation of Cortada Alta, it starts at 1,200 feet, which is pretty high, and then goes up to 1,650 feet at the very top. And the vineyard is virtually above the fog all day, all summer, all spring, all summer into harvest. There are very few days when the fog is at the vineyard level. And also the wind is not as strong up there in the afternoon as it is down in the valley floor. So Peterson for Mansfield Dun is down at the valley floor, might be the lowest vineyard in the appellation. And then Cortada Alta is the highest, above the fog, above most of the strong winds. So it leads to riper fruit, but also a longer hang time because of the elevation. It's so cool at night. It takes longer into the late morning for the fruit, the vines and the fruit to warm up and start doing their thing than it does at the valley floor, which is more moderate. It's cooler during the day and cooler and not as cool at night.
Do you see a yield difference at all?
Oh, well, Cortada Alta is still a very young vineyard,
Okay.
but we're seeing far lower yields way up high than we are at the valley floor.
Yeah, I mean, that would have been my guess, but I didn't know if that was the case or not, but that would make sense.
Oh, definitely.
Matt, with you getting fruit from as many different places as you get fruit from, I mean, this is probably true with John Peterson's vineyards as well, but clones with Pinot, people always like to talk about clones and the like. What do you see differences? I mean, is it a big deal in Santa Lucia, or is it not that big a thing?
I think it's a big deal. And, you know, my favorite clone that I work with in the Santa Lucia Highlands is the Pisoni Selection, which was brought over by Gary Pisoni in ways that we no longer discuss in public forums, but the clones do make a big difference. And generally speaking, that Pisoni Selection is really dark and rich and brambly and can make wines of just incredible structure, but also really, really finessed. So that's probably my favorite clone that I work with. In addition to kind of the plethora of Dijon plantings, and we have some Mariafeld Clone 23 at Sierra Mar, which I think is really, really interesting as well. So yeah, the clonal differences in the Santa Lucia Highlands are great. Pisoni being my favorite.
I found that one clone that we worked with for a while there was 943, which is a newer Dijon clone, tiny berries, a lot of them seedless. It was the kind of clone that I would pick based on really the weather. I picked it as low as like 21.7 and as high as 27.3, but I didn't want those seedless berries to go away. And one of the challenges in Santa Lucia, I think, I mean, there's many positives, but one of the challenges is rainfall in a lot of cases, or lack thereof. And so if those vines on the 943 got too stressed, those tiny berries could go away. But they don't get an awful lot of rain in Santa Lucia. In fact, this year, I think they're at about 6.5 inches for the year so far. And 6 of those came in 1 2-day period. So it's not quite the same. Ed, over in all the vintages that you've dealt with, have you been able to correlate anything to like a better year is better rainfall, a cooler, what brings on a better year? And what do you think are recent vintages in the SLH?
I think the SLH vintages are so consistent for the most part. You know, I think they average maybe 12 or 13 inches of rain a year. So it's not a lot of rain in a normal year. So this year we're only half of normal so far. But drought years or rainy years, the quality is so consistent. And the actual growing year was so long in the SLH. So they bud out earlier than other Pinot regions in California, and harvest pretty much last as far as Pinot regions in California go. It's an incredibly long growing season. So we always get great flavors year in and year out, but I'd say my favorites from the SLH are 02, 07, 09, 18 and 19.
Okay. You had to skip in there for a few vintages somehow. So.
I forgot 03. 03 I love too.
You know, I mean, to me, I think I would probably go with 99, 05, and 18 were my 3 favorites from the area. All longer, cooler growing seasons. I don't think I'm actually pretty impressed with how 19s are coming along. That is one of the things that I wasn't certain how good it was going to be, but I'm really pretty happy with them. And Matt, you're shaking your head. Obviously, you like your 19s as well?
Yeah, as after 18, which was so mild and even, 19 was kind of a mix of 17 and 18, whereas it was had a little more heat spurts. But I really think that pushed ripeness along really nicely. And the wines, I think the 19s are a little more dense and have a little more stuffing and backbone than the 18s, which are just absolutely gorgeous. So, Ed, like you were saying, the 18s and 19s are both incredible. I'm really happy with both of those.
And I can't believe I forgot about 99, my first vintage in the SLH. But I've tried a lot of 99 Pinots from the SLH. And to date, my very favorite, and it's still drinking well, is the 99 Siduri from Pizzoni.
Thank you. That was a great, I loved that vintage. 99, I remember we did not start picking anywhere because, I mean, we got fruit at that point in time, Russian River, up in Oregon, and all that. We didn't start picking any place until October.
Yeah, we picked Pizzoni on October 8th. I'll never forget that date, 1999. I got yelled at a little bit because I waited so long, but the wine turned out great. Not as great as the Siduri, but the Testarossa 99 Pizzoni was very good.
I think the 99s have just held on. I mean, I think a lot of them are drinking still exceptionally well. That's one of the things in SLH also is the acidity because of the cooling winds, that kind of thing. The wines really do age, I think, on their acid. Matt, yeah, you feel the same way?
No, that's absolutely true. And one of the things that I worry about in some areas of California, especially with a lot of plantings of Dijon clones, which tend to ripen a little bit earlier, is you want to have ripe flavors, but you want some acid retention in the fruit, and you want that freshness with the ripe flavors. And Santa Lucia, just the climate and the wind, really balances those parts in such a graceful way to where you can have ripe flavors, you can have a lot of freshness, you can have dark fruit, but the wines age on acid so gracefully. And the 99s that you guys made are probably a testament to that.
Yeah, 99 was also one of those years that from a winemaking point of view, I mean, when you push everything out to October, and you'll testify to this as well, you can run into issues at some point in time. I mean, you can make wonderful wines, but you can run out of tank space real quickly or fermenting space because everything is backed up. But the great thing on 99 is, you could go to Gary Francione and say, I want to pick on Tuesday. And he'd say, yeah, well, I'm already booked for Tuesday. And then you'd be like, well, Wednesday, Thursday, it doesn't make any difference. In that kind of vintage, it really didn't within a few days because the weather was so incredibly mild.
I love those vintages. We don't get them often enough.
No, we unfortunately do not. So both of you guys, tell me a little bit then. I mean, we've talked about, the area, the effect of the winds, the fruit flavors that you get in the acidity. Talk to me about winemaking. I don't know if you'd say them peculiarities, things that are specific from a winemaking point of view, because both of you gotten fruit from different areas, different places, not just Santa Lucia Highlands. Anything special that you do or don't do in the SLH? Anything you found that does work or doesn't work?
I think more than any other region where I get Pinot from, the SLH really needs to be tasted, if not every day, every other day, because things happen quickly as the fruit gets ripe. So it can go from being just a little bit underripe to being overripe in a matter of days. And so you really need to taste. You can't just look at numbers, more than any other region for me.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that, Ed. And another part of that story is that, a lot of our picking decisions, we'll look at some chemistry numbers and we'll look at sugars, but a lot of that is based on flavor. And a lot of the chemistry that we wind up with in the fermenter and the winery is pretty picture perfect. So it's more the St. Lucia picking decisions are a lot more guided by feel and intuition rather than looking at numbers and things like that, which I think is really great, and it should be that way everywhere.
I'm trying something different with my Clarice wines, and I'm using an awful lot of whole cluster, and I don't see that done as much in the Santa Lucia as in some other areas. I'm sure it is done by some, but I'm in the almost 80% range in the 18s, and I think before I was a little maybe afraid or reluctant to go the whole cluster route. But quite frankly, one of the things that happens when you do whole cluster is it causes the pH to go up. And we got such great acidity in San Lucia Highlands fruit that it doesn't have a negative effect in doing that, but it actually builds in some tannin. And I don't really think, I think San Lucia wines often age on their acidity more than their tannin. I think it's working out kind of nicely for me to try doing something like that, do some whole cluster on it, which is not something I'd really done much of before.
With the whole cluster, are you changing your length of time in barrel and amount of new oak?
The single vineyards have got a pretty decent amount of new wood on them. I have yet to change the amount of time in barrel, but I definitely have looked at that possibility and thought about keeping it in there for a longer period of time. I am in some cases holding on to the wines a little bit longer post bottling before anything else, just to give them some time to evolve. There, one of the things that can be challenging with 80% whole cluster is you don't have a lot of juice to do punch down. So sometimes for the first couple of days, I'll end up doing pump overs because it's the only way really to kind of get things flowing at that point in time. So that's a change.
Do you find yourself doing a little bit less Saunier or bleeds out of tank with
generally, yes. That would be the case, although I still will look at what I think overall yields were. And you know, if I was expecting 3 tons to the acre and I got 3.5, then, you know, maybe I will still go ahead and go with a more aggressive Saunier. But if it's kind of in that range, that is one of the things I do think San Lucia Highlands has going for it. And Ed, you just talked about consistency. Not only is it a great area, but it's incredibly consistent. And I think that even more or less goes to yields also. I mean, that you were talking about the higher elevation vineyards, you're having lower yields, but it's a younger vineyard as well. And we'll see once it gets established. But I think on those that are right kind of in the mid-range there, you can work, and as long as you take care of things, you can get pretty decent yields, not huge yields, but on a consistent basis. And that means that you're not like bouncing back and forth from a winemaking point of view from year to year, changing things around. We do have a question that was asked, and it was, can you describe, either one of you, describe the flavor profile of, say, an average SLH Pinot versus some of the other regions in California? Either one of you guys, go for it.
I'd say it depends on if you're, oh, go ahead, Matt.
Oh, go ahead, Ed.
I was going to say the flavors really dependent if you're talking about fruit along River Road versus fruit up in the mountains. So Cortada Alta, Sierra Mar, Pizzoni are more on the mountains. And then Peterson, Rosellas, Gary's are more along River Road, so much lower in elevation under the fog. And so I'd say those are the two major factors that influence the flavors, other than the clones and the growers, of course. But true cool climate Pinot flavors along River Road and the valley floor. A lot of people say tomato skin, higher acidity down in the valley floor. Real beautiful cool climate flavors, not unlike Santa Maria Valley or Sonoma Coast or Russian River, but higher in acidity for sure.
Matt, what are your
thoughts? And I think that's pretty spot on. And you know, it's a lot of my observations on what we source from First Dairy is that the vineyards that are further south, Sierra Mar, you mentioned that one, tends to have a darker fruit profile. In some vintages, you know, kind of bluish, blackish fruit. And as we work our way north towards Rosellas, we'll kind of have those classic cool climate, you know, bright cherry, pomegranate, really effusive, bright aromas. So such an interesting contrast in such a small growing area that's so defined by that wind and fog.
I find that Russian River, and this is going to be vague stereotypes really, but there's a distinct kind of cola character in Russian River that I don't see that much in San Lucia Highlands. There is on Sonoma Coast, I don't know, a forest floor type character that you can see maybe a little hint of here or there occasionally in SLH, but not that much. I think Santa Rita tends to have more tannin, maybe a little bit darker fruit profile. And you are right. As you get further south in the area, you'll notice some more darker flavors. But I still think there is more along the red fruit line, even on some of the bigger Pinots. They can have weight and extract, but they're still more red fruited in Santa Lucia Highlands than I get in some other areas.
I agree.
One of the other things too, and we talked about it a little bit with the 99 vintage, and but one of the things is I think the area, I mean, the Pinots can be really, really tasty. You just pop one and drink it, and that's great. But I do think they age pretty well because of that acid also. Not just in 99, but even in some warmer years where you think they might not age that well, you can be surprised at how they hold up. So
I love drinking 10, 15, 18-year-old Pinots.
oh yeah.
Oh, sorry, I think I hit an internet snag. Sorry.
Yeah, for a second. So you love drinking, you were saying older Pinot?
Yeah, and from the SLH, they do age so beautifully.
So we just got a couple of minutes left here. Let's briefly hit on what happened in 2020. Nobody really wants to talk that much about it, but obviously some real tragedy as far as the fires and smoke issues in the area, and not a lot of red grapes to be picked, but the whites I know seem to come through just fine from Santa Lucia Highlands. But I know a lot of the reds did not. I don't think, were either one of you guys able to really make anything?
We made
we were not, unfortunately.
We made Pinot from I'm sorry, I keep getting internet snag, so I talked over you, Matt. Go ahead.
We didn't, and I'd be remiss to not mention the Francione and Pisoni families that we've partnered with, and Adam partnered with when he basically right after he founded Siduri, that have been really good to us, and being able to work with good growers that we evaluated things very carefully, but eventually it was a mutual decision to not bring the fruit in, and immediately we started optimistically looking ahead to next year. So it was a tragedy in many ways, but again, grateful for our friends and our grower partners in Santa Lucia that are so critical to us.
And so Ed, you did bring in a little bit of stuff?
Yeah, since John Peterson owns both of his vineyards, it was either drop the fruit or see what we could do with it. And so we're glad we brought in the Peterson Chardonnay from down along River Road. That was beautiful, and there wasn't much of it, but it's really nice. The Chardonnay from Cortada Alta has taken on a little bit of smoke, so we'll have to see how that develops. The Pinot from down low in elevation at Peterson started out really nice, but has taken on some smoke in barrel. And the Pinot and Syrah at Cortada Alta are just off the charts smoky, but we made them. It's interesting to smell and taste them, but we don't know what will become of them as they age, mostly in tank, not so much in barrel.
So someone was asking about any can't miss stops like in the Salinas Valley, any place to grab a bite. I mean, I go into Gonzales and go to Mexican food places. Matt, I know you were fond of
La Rinconcita is my can't miss.
Yeah, La Rinconcita is great. There's the bakery in town in Gonzales as well. If you get there early in the mornings, that's where everybody seems to gather at some point in time. So the bakery is really good. And then I think there's the other Mexican place that is opened is La Enchilada, I believe, which is opened. I think it's a relative of the folks from Rinconcita that has opened that place, but it's much smaller and it's a little harder, I think, to get in some ways. And then Matt, you and I've had the pleasure of staying in Soledad at the what's it called?
The Valley Harvest Inn.
The Valley Harvest Inn. That's right.
That's the one.
Yeah,
it's a great place. Very comfortable.
And there are, I think, 5 or so wineries along River Road that are open for tasting. And then there are a lot of the places, wineries in the area do have tasting rooms over either in Carmel Valley or in Carmel, Monterey too. So there are opportunities to taste over there. All right, so last but not least, I don't want to end on a 2020 talk at all. With 2021, I think to some extent we're all just looking forward to getting like back in again also. But is there anything in particular that either one of you is going to be doing this year differently than you had before, or trying to push limits, or something you want to experiment with? I mean, is there anything? Let's give everybody something to look forward to, some excitement that's going to be coming up. Ed?
I think it's based on a 2020 that I might make an earlier picking decision in 2021 if we see any fire threats coming or storms coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. Not Gulf of Mexico. What's the Gulf on the
Alaska.
Gulf of California.
Gulf of California. Thank you. So if we see any storms brewing down there, I may get things started picking earlier. But look forward to a great growing season. We'll see.
Yeah, Matt?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to dealing with normal viticulture and winemaking complaints. Like, we're complaining about the lack of rain. That's kind of nice in comparison to complaining about wildfires ravaging the mountains and really, messing up our harvest. So just a return to normalcy. And, Ed and I and you, Adam, we all love the 18 and 19 vintages, and just getting back to that really is going to be really exciting, and I can't wait.
I'm looking forward to seeing how things are growing after having a year. Obviously, the rainy season isn't done, but a year where we haven't had that much in the way of rainfall. It's going to be really interesting to see how the vines grow, how early things bud out, and then what decisions we make in the vineyard to try to deal with that particular situation. I think yesterday was 76 degrees down there. 70. I mean, it was 80 degrees up here in Sonoma County. It was warm.
It's starting to feel like 2015 all over again, in a way.
A little bit, yeah. I think I could see that. That's a pretty good analogy there. So I guess very last, Ed, you tell them just a little bit. I mean, what wine is out from Mansfield Dun right now that you really love?
Actually, the 2018 SLH. We'll be tasting this next week in our World of Pinot seminar. I think it's a new release for us, and I think it's drinking beautifully, and it combines both of the Mansfield Dun vineyards, Cortada Alta and Peterson. Just shows off the appellation beautifully.
Right. Matt, what do you have in hand and pocket that you're loving from Adrian?
The 18 Rosellas has been my favorite lately. It's been drinking beautifully. Adam, Siduri's been in that vineyard for forever, but I just absolutely love the effusive, bright red fruit character of that wine. Really awesome, kind of electric acidity as well. So, kind of in our pocket of several vineyard designate offerings, that's probably my favorite at this moment. And I love the AVA wine as well, which is a blend of all those vineyards.
And for me, I think it would be the Clarice Gary's 2018, also 18 vintage. I find that with the whole cluster and just the fruit character there, it's really come together in an incredibly balanced sort of way. It's one that I think is going to age for a long, long time, but it certainly drinks really, really well right now. It's just one that unfortunately I popped the bottle. If I want to do one of these tastings and I pop the bottle, before I'm done, the bottle's done at some point in time, and the tasting maybe goes a little bit, the Zoom taste discussion goes a little awry at that point in time, but it's fun. So, well, thank you guys very much for doing this. I really appreciate it. It was good to see you both, and I look forward to the event upcoming, the World of Pinot. There'll be many, many more events that World of Pinot's pulled together that are going to be really, really exciting. So we'll do it virtually this year and hopefully in person next year.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Matt. And thank you, everyone watching.
Yep. Take care, everybody. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. Great to catch up with you. And thanks so much for joining us.
Sure. Bye.
Bye.